Hello, everyone. Camile Bordas. She's a novelist and short story writer in English. She's the author of the forthcoming short story collection One Son Only, and two novels, The Material and How to Behave in a Crowd. Her earlier two books, Partie Commune and Le Treize Déserts, were written in her native French. Her fiction has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, and the Paris Review. She has been named a Guggenheim Fellow. Born in France, raised in Mexico City and Paris, she was living in Chicago until she's agreed to join us here for the year as our Blackburn Artist-in-Residence. Her first short story collection will be released in January. Her short stories have been described as perfectly formed marvels, funny, skeptical, self-aware, and humane. Please join me in welcoming.
Well, thank you all for being here at this strange hour. I don't think I've ever done a reading at 3 p.m. But it's probably good. Yes. So thank you so much for having me at this. I was going to say this semester, but this year. I mean, this semester also. That's the one we're in. So thank you for that one, and in advance, thank you for the next one. I'm really happy to be here. I was really impressed by this campus at first. I'm just, like little by little finding my marks. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Misha. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you, Puente, for putting this all together and sending emails and doing all this, and in general for being so patient with me because I don't know anything about tech and many other things. So I never know what to read. But it's pretty handy that I have this collection coming in a couple months. No, January is in 3 months. 3 months. So I just received the galleys, so that makes it easier. I don't have to print anything, and I get to read a whole story, so I don't need to wonder where do I start, where do I stop, and where do I leave them. So I'm going to read the title story, One Son Only, and need to know nothing about it because I'm going to read the whole thing. When I decide what to read, I usually try to pick something in first person because there's quite a few stories in third person in that book, but I found the first person easier to read out loud. The one thing about this one is it's not narrated by a woman, it's narrated by a youngish father of two, so just keep that in mind. I'm trying to imagine very frazzled middle-aged man in my place, Okay, so this is called One Son Only. I don't know, are we doing questions after, or it's just like a read and greet?
Maybe a few questions, but yeah.
Alright, so One Son Only. This is not a rewrite of that story in which plants and animals and people keep winding up dead over the course of a school year, but it starts the same, and it feels odd not to acknowledge, so I will. I just did. Things kept dying. My father first in June, then the puppy my ex-wife had adopted to help the children get over their grandpa, and then the school janitor, Lane. Right after Halloween, Lane had died during lunchtime in the cafeteria in front of the kids. Heart attack. A few weeks later, my son, Ernest, came home from school and told me that he hoped there was no afterlife. I hope there's no afterlife, he said. We were in the living room, looking through the window, waiting to see if the rain would turn to snow. I hope he's not watching over me. I asked who he meant. I thought maybe he was talking about my father, but perhaps it was Lane on his mind. I didn't think it could be the dog. I just don't want there to be an afterlife is all, Ernest said, after thinking about it for a few seconds. For anybody. I think when you're dead, you should stay dead. I had him and his sister for the weekend. Sally, who was now 11 and explored Catholicism to her mother's alarm, kept talking about her hope that my father was watching over us. My father had been very fond of her. He'd taken her to the Art Institute every Wednesday, taught her painting techniques and a lot about art history. They'd been obnoxious together, playing games like who could most quickly recite the titles of all the artworks in Gallery 397, Sally's favorite, or all of Pablo Picasso's middle names in order. The full name was Pablo Diego José Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno María de las Remedios Cipriano de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz y Picasso. a succession of sounds I came to know as well as the alphabet. A few weeks before my father died, he had asked me if he could take Sally to the Venice Biennale, where one of his paintings was being shown. We both knew that this would likely be his last trip abroad. I told him he could take Sally to Venice if he took Ernest too. Ernest doesn't care about art, my father had said. He's 8 years old, I'd said. He cares about his grandpa. They'd all spend 2 weeks touring Italy, Venice, Florence, and Rome, a trip Sally still mentioned at least once a day. A trip that I, alone with my father as a child, had also taken a version of. Can you look up Bill Murray's net worth? Ernest asked me, turning away from the window. He'd watched Groundhog Day again at his mother's the day before. He could have asked her to search for Bill Murray's financial situation, but for some reason he kept these kinds of requests for me. I looked up Bill Murray's fortune online. And how rich are we? Ernest asked. A lot less than that, I said. I don't know why I wasn't ready to tell him the actual number, why it felt wrong. My father had left behind a significant amount of money, and I was still getting used to it. I hadn't known him to have so much. My phone rang. Nikki couldn't help checking on the kids whenever they were with me for the weekend. I got a call from Ernest's teacher, she said. How are you doing? Sorry, yes, how are you doing? She says Ernie's drawings worry her. She says he keeps drawing dead people. I left the living room. We know this already, I said once I reached my office. It's just a phase. Little boys are drawn to violent scenes. Nikki asked me to look through our son's backpack for what he'd drawn at school that day. Describe what you see, she said, once the drawing was in my hand. What I saw was a single page with the instruction, draw yourself many years in the future, ! And my son's response, a drawing of his own gravestone, with mine, his mother's, and Sally's surrounding it. Are there dates on the gravestones, Nikki asked. Only on mine, I said. According to our song, I'll die in almost exactly 2 years. My ex-wife audibly shivered at the other end of the line. It's just a drawing, Nick. I was pissed that Ernest's teacher had called her instead of me. He shouldn't be thinking about death so much, Nikki said. I think he might be traumatized. Let's not bring trauma into this. He's had a rough year. I'm surprised he didn't draw your father's grave, Nikki said. He misses him. Does he? We all do. Sally came into my office then. Is that Mom on the phone? She asked. Yes, honey. Do you want to talk to her? Well, I just saw her this morning, my daughter said, before leaving the room. They really make you feel special, Nikki said. Well, at least she didn't draw me dead in 2 years, I said. Sally wanted to hang some art. She thought that my new apartment lacked life. And since I'd inherited, on top of all of this money and books, my father's last series of paintings, a series Sally had seen take shape in the old man's studio for months, she thought that what we should hang was a no-brainer. There's no room for all four, I told her. You'll have to pick one. I like the walls white like that, Ernest said. It's depressing, Sally said. It feels like a hospital in here. You've never been into a hospital, I said, deciding, apparently, to side with my son. There's stuff everywhere at Mom's, Ernest went on. It's suffocating. Suffocating, Sally said. That's a big word for you. Shut the fuck up, Ernest said. I should have said something, and maybe I would have, had I been given more time, but Sally lost a tooth then, her last cuspid, on the breadstick she'd been snacking on. She spit the tooth onto the coffee table, and the sound it made hitting the glass was the last thing Ernest and I heard for a while, as Sally quickly left the room, leaving us to stare at the piece of bone she'd just expelled, sitting amid a little blood and half-chewed dough. Was it a piece of bone, by the way? You always hear that your smile is a visible part of your skeleton, but are teeth made of actual bone? Ernest started blinking rapidly, every blink drawing the left corner of his mouth up with it. Are you okay? I asked. He dipped a finger in the blood next to Sally's tooth. This seemed to calm him down, so I let him do it. He drew a red circle on the glass. The reason my father had liked Sally more than Ernest was that Ernest wasn't very good at drawing. Or rather, he wasn't curious about how to get better at drawing. He'd gone with his grandfather to the Art Institute once a week, too, for a time. But soon he asked to be excused, and my father never forgave him. One thing he'd recognized in Ernest, however, was a talent for drawing near-perfect circles freehand. I think that's why he was so pissed at him in the end. An assured freehand circle was a sign that you could be great at drawing, according to my father, if only you put your mind to it. It's a nice circle, I said to my son. He clenched his fist and, with the meaty side, erased what he'd drawn. The rain had now acquired consistency of mucus, each drop sticking to and sliding down the window. How could it only be 6 p.m.? Time moved so slowly when the kids were around. I couldn't wait to experience what everyone said. They grew up so fast. Even seeing them every other weekend, I noticed no changes. I guess Ernest had changed somewhat, though. One time when he was in kindergarten, I picked him up and the teacher's summary of his behavior read, "Cried often, but participated." I'd shown it to Nikki, who were still married then, and we both laughed at it for minutes, commenting on how wonderful an epitaph it would be, before pretending that we hadn't just joked about a day when our son would be dead. We hadn't really. We joked about a hypothetical epitaph for a hypothetical person way in the future. And now the real Ernest was drawing all of us dead, and I couldn't remember when I'd last seen him cry. Not at his grandfather's funeral, not for the dog, and not for Lane. Sally came back into the room with a toothbrush to polish her tooth and a little cup to place it in. She informed me that she would leave the tooth right outside her bedroom door tonight, as opposed to under her pillow, because she didn't want to be woken up by the tooth fairy, whom we all knew she knew was me. She didn't say anything about Ernest messing with her blood. Instead, she jumped back into the conversation we'd been having before the tooth, preparing to offer a compromise. "I can tell you're not ready to hang Grandpa's paintings," she told Ernest. "Maybe it's too soon." Ernest didn't seem to understand what Sally meant by too soon. "Grandpa hated me," he said. "No, he didn't," Sally said. It would have been better if I'd said it myself, or immediately backed up Sally, but looking at Ernest, I had the most vivid memory of being his age, of having to go to my father's studio to show him the drawings I'd made that week, something that I'd had to do every Sunday night. I remembered him discarding drawing after drawing, and how convinced I'd been that he hated my guts. "He thought I was stupid because my favorite part of the Italy trip was the Trevi Fountain," Ernest said. "He didn't think you were stupid, he just wanted you to like the museums and the churches more." Sally again. I still hadn't spoken to reassure my son that his grandfather had loved him. I thought it was pretty weird of Ernest, too, after seeing the Bargello, or the Bridge of Sighs for that matter, to have liked the Trevi Fountain so much. My own favorite part of the Italy tour as a child had been the San Marco convent in Florence, a good choice according to my father, though he'd seemed surprised by it. Perhaps he'd been more surprised by my capacity to make good choices than by the choice itself. "I was going to say, let's not hang Grandpa's paintings anyway," Sally went on, "but maybe we could hang some of our stuff, just so it's less sad in here." "That's a great idea," I said. Even Ernest thought so. While I made dinner, I let them pick their best work to scotch tape on the walls. After dinner, there would be bedtime, I determined. After bedtime, I could try to work, maybe finish that chapter I had been writing for weeks. The nights I had the kids were usually more productive. Since I'd bought myself a new apartment, a new desk, the right ergonomic chair, and a year off from my job, I discovered that I was the kind of writer who worked better when he was stealing time from other obligations. An hour here, 2 hours there, in between meetings, on my lunch break. I was better in a rush. 3 months now of entire days at my disposal, and I'd written so little. In the mornings, I looked at what I had, despaired, and then read better writers than me for the rest of the day. Lately, I'd been looking at art books, too. My father's collection had made its way to my living room. But tonight, I would work well, I told myself, breading the cutlets. Because I'd been deprived of the possibility for a few hours, I would work well. Dinner, put the kids to bed, then work. I told Nikki I would talk to Ernest about his drawing of our family graves, but I knew I wouldn't. How did one start a conversation like that anyway? How did one keep it on track? It always looked so easy in the movies. Mothers telling daughters how hard it was being a woman, fathers explaining death to sons in less than a minute, and in both cases, explanations making sense, big warm hug, conversation over. I couldn't do it. And what was wrong with drawing your own grave anyway? There was something therapeutic about it, wasn't there? We'd done it since Ernest was old enough to draw stick figures, drawn the things he was afraid of. This reminded me of a book I'd read as a college student one weekend when I was visiting my father. I'd taken it from his shelf, a slim volume about the drawings made by children in war zones, what could be learned from them. I don't know why it had appealed to me. I guess I'd always been attracted to technically poor drawings, lines for limbs, squares for buildings, things that looked like I could have drawn them myself. My father had tried to make my interest sound fancy, said I liked art brut, but I don't know if I liked it exactly, or if I simply found comfort in it, its naivete. If I could reproduce a drawing easily, then it meant that I could have been its creator in the first place, right? At least that's what I thought as a child, when I copied Bill Traylor's Crooked Houses and Henry Darger's Little Girls with Penises. My father had this rule that I had to make at least one sketch a day. I could keep copying, sure, you learned a lot from copying, he said, but it was important to come up with things of your own too, your own way of rendering the texture of a lemon on a wooden table, for example, your own way of interpreting shadows on a sill. It was a person's way of dealing with the small things that made him unique. I drowned the cutlets in boiling oil and realized as I watched them golden that I remembered quite a few things about the book about children in war zones, and what they drew. I remembered that roads that suddenly stopped or mouthless faces could be interpreted as signs of trauma. I remembered that traumatized children tended never to draw the sun. Ernest didn't draw suns anymore, hadn't drawn a sun in months, but maybe it was all right. Maybe he thought the sun was implied in those drawings, or boring to draw. And no sun in a child's drawing was still better than several suns, according to the book, if memory served. Several suns could indicate developing psychosis, or even psychopathic tendencies. What you wanted really as a parent was for your child to draw one sun and one sun only. But where would a sun have fit in Ernest's drawing anyway, the drawing of our family plot? Wouldn't it have been worse if Ernest had drawn a sun there over all our gravestones? We ate dinner. Sally made a big deal out of her missing tooth, but all in all she was happy, a happy girl who kept talking and talking about the exhibition she just prepared in the living room, her day at school, her memories of Florence. It was hard to relate to Sally sometimes. When she was too happy, I could sometimes feel like I was in a commercial, like I was watching a commercial rather, for healthy snacks. I'd be happy that she was happy, of course, but I'd also feel like I was losing her, like I couldn't reach her where she was. I'd had this fear before becoming a father that my children would be like me, mostly sad and over-anxious, but Nikki had promised me they wouldn't, that we would raise them to be happy and only reasonably worried. I told her that the fear then became that my children and I would have nothing in common. She'd laughed at that. She thought that I was joking. The exhibition in the living room was mostly of Sally's work. She went everywhere with the leather case her grandfather had given her years ago, her portfolio. But most of Ernest's production was at Nikki's, and so he hadn't had much to pick from. Sally was a big fan of the cross-section, always had been. Through the years, she'd drawn countless variations of apartment buildings whose facades had been cut away to reveal what every family was doing, each in its little square. Tonight, she'd hung cross-sections I'd never seen of our local supermarket and of her pregnant aunt, Nikki's sister, who was expecting twins. I don't understand something, Ernest said as we observed the twin fetuses. Are the babies going to be from two different dads? Sally told him he was an idiot, that even though Aunt Sophie had used a sperm donor, it was still only one guy's jizz that they didn't just mix a bunch of different jizzes in a glass before they gave it to the woman to drink. Ernest had only 3 drawings in the exhibit. 2 he'd made in a rush right before dinner of the Trevi fountain, piles of shiny coins at the bottom of the fountain in the first drawing, and then in the second, nothing left after the cleaning crew had come, no sun in either picture. And one he'd made the day before at his mom's, a still from Groundhog Day, the scene where Bill Murray orders the whole diner menu for breakfast. He liked drawing food. What he'd done best there was the glisten on the blob of wine-colored jam in the middle of the donut, and I congratulated him for it. Great job on the jam, I said, and he asked me to look up how much money was at the bottom of the Trevi fountain. It changes all the time, I said, you know that. Ernest actually knew a lot more about the Trevi fountain than I did, fascinated as he'd been after seeing it scraped clean one morning under police surveillance. He'd been the one to tell me that the fountain had to be cleaned once a week because people threw so much money in it, and that the money went to the homeless of Rome. I think there should be a website that tells you how much money they pull out of the fountain every week, Ernest said. The Trevi is so boring, Sally said. At first I thought you could wish for anything there, but the wish is actually mandatory. You have to wish to go back to Rome one day. I think that's just a guideline, I said. You're always free to wish for whatever. I wish for Grandpa to be able to see us right now, Sally said, closing her eyes. Mine met Ernest's as she said this, and I saw sheer panic there, and I saw that he saw me see it. He broke eye contact immediately. I pretended to look at my watch and said that it was time for bed. But I didn't finish my placard, Sally said. I haven't named all my drawings yet. I said that she could finish tomorrow. Sally said, I can't wait for tomorrow, and I felt it again, the distance between us. While her brother brushed his teeth, Sally told me we could just hang one of her grandfather's paintings in her bedroom if Ernest was really dead set against seeing them in the rest of the apartment. It could be just for me, she said. I could fall asleep looking at it like the friars in San Marco fell asleep to their own personal Fra Angelico every night. It felt wrong to me, hanging such an expensive work of art in an 11-year-old's bedroom, like jewelry on a newborn. I'll think about it, I said. That was good enough for her. Ernest, as I tucked him in, asked me if he was going to die during the night, something I knew he asked his mother every night as well. I promised he wouldn't. I'd been afraid of sleep at his age too, of being unconscious, of what could happen then, that perhaps I would go too far in and unplug my brain forever instead of just turning it off for the night. I remembered asking my father once, will I die during the night, and him saying that he didn't know, that no one could know these things. I never asked again. To Ernest, though, I'd always given the only answer a modern parent could give. No, honey, of course you won't die during the night, which reassured him, but also made it so that he had to ask again and again every time he went to bed, and made me worry that, on the off chance that he did die in his sleep, the last thing my son would have heard from me was a lie. I think that's why I loved my father in the end, his honesty. It turned people off. It had turned me off, too, when he started applying it to Ernest. But it was meant to help. It had taught me not to be a wimp. Not that I thought Ernest was a wimp, but he definitely hadn't come out of his visit to the San Marco convent with my father as transformed as I'd been by mine. At San Marco, going into cell after cell with my dad, one friar's bedroom after another, in utter silence, I'd realized that what he wanted me to understand was that one slept alone and didn't complain, that being alone was not only fine, but what one had to aspire to. At least I think that's what he meant. I cleaned up the kitchen. I wanted a drink. I never drank when I was alone with the kids, though, not even a glass of wine once they were down, in case something happened and I had to drive them to the hospital. Even when Nikki and I were still married, I waited until she was home at night to have one. She didn't drink when she was alone with them either, but when we were together, we often had a glass or two and didn't worry about who would do what in an emergency. We were good drunks together. We would figure it out, was the thought. I wanted to talk to her again. I looked at the weather forecast on my phone instead, even though I knew that the only way Chicago could work as a city was if we all agreed to stop doing that. Outside my windows, 20-somethings, but also people my age, were flocking along Damon Avenue to gather at Gold Star, Big Star, Violet Hour, Rainbow, to drink and forget about something or think about it harder. It was barely 9. The night was only starting for them. I understood that the reason people moved to the suburbs to raise their kids had little to do with the schools. It was because they had to stop seeing how much fun the childless were having. I sat at my desk and looked at the last few lines I'd written, but I'd forgotten to put my phone on silent and was immediately interrupted by a string of texts from my friend Henry, who was on his way to Paris to promote his 6th novel, which had just been translated into French. He was still at the airport, taking off in an hour, but he'd already met a French fan, who was fairly famous, a cute lawyer who was on the same flight as him. He sent me a selfie of them eating tortas at O'Hare's Frontera, Henry's latest novel, on the table between them. Lucky bastard, I texted back. All that happened to me tonight was Sally lost a tooth. That's amazing, Henry responded. You should write a story about it. I couldn't tell if he was being serious. Henry was constantly telling me that I should write more personal stuff, that the reason my first and so far only novel had sold so little was that people didn't want to read about 100% fictional characters anymore. They wanted real humans, real life, and I'd had such an interesting life, being the son of a big deal artist, traveling the world with them, losing my mother so young, meeting Nikki after having been originally set up with her sister, yes, the one expecting twins, and then the divorce. People love divorce stories, Henry said. The book he was going to Paris to promote had in large part been inspired by his own. For a minute, I considered writing about Sally's tooth. I texted Harry, are teeth actually bone or some other material? And he answered, look it up, which I did. I learned that bones were made of living tissue and could therefore heal, but teeth couldn't. Teeth were deader than bones. My daughter had lost something that had been dead inside her for a long time. I wondered if Nikki still kept the kids' teeth. I looked at Ernest's drawing again. He'd drawn some flowers on his mother's and his sister's graves, at least. Both of ours were just gray. I wondered for the first time what happened to children of divorce when they died, which parent they got buried next to, if they died before having families of their own. Now that I'd split with Nikki and planned on never remarrying, I assumed I would be buried with my own parents at Rose Hill and not with her at Hebrew Benevolent. I'd converted to Judaism to put her mind at ease that we would rest together for eternity. But now she'd either forgotten ever wanting this or felt ridiculous for having wanted it, which were two completely different things but still looked exactly the same to whoever wasn't in Nikki's head. Ernest's drawing wasn't that bad, I thought. technically speaking. Why had my father insisted that he was weak? He'd never told Ernest this directly, but he told me. I hadn't wanted to make too much of his obvious preference for Sally before then. I wanted to believe that it was only natural, that the first grandchild always had to hold a special place in a man's heart. But he'd explained to me one day that it wasn't so. He preferred Sally because she was smarter than Ernest. Ernest was about 3 at the time. My father couldn't help comparing them, noting what Sally had already achieved by the time she was Ernest's age, how she'd spoken in full sentences and shown curiosity about the written word long before age 2, how early she'd asked about God, when her brother seemed concerned only with what was in front of him, if that. I told my father that girls and boys developed at a different pace, but he countered that even I had been smarter than Ernest at his age, and that I had been a boy. I'd felt a split second of relief at not being last, at not faring as poorly in my father's estimation as Ernest did. A relief immediately followed by guilt, of course, which had driven me to defend Ernest's honor with even more passion, to no end. Look at this drawing, my father had concluded, pointing at one of Ernest's maroon crayon storms on our fridge, ruining it for me. Sally already had the intuition of perspective at his age. What is this shit? I believed before then that all children's drawings held some interest, but they could never be bad. But of course they could. I went to the living room, Ernest's drawing in hand, to look for the book about children in war zones. I didn't think my son was traumatized by his grandfather's death, or the dogs, or Lane's, but maybe? How could you tell trauma from fear or from deep sadness? When my mother died, I'd been horribly sad, not traumatized, I don't think. My father had taken me to Italy the following week to see the San Marco convent and other things that lasted longer than people. It had helped. I found the book and started reading it, taking occasional breaks to look at the drawings on the wall. I had children who drew supermarkets, I thought. I had children who drew well-lit places, an abundance of fresh produce, an abundance of food, babies about to be born, flowers on some of our graves. Not massacres, not enemies, nothing like the drawings I was seeing in the book, which their creators had titled Nuclear Winter, Dead Dad on Threshold, 3 Bodies at a Crossroads, Headless Children in Ditch. As I checked my kids' drawings for signs of trauma, it occurred to me that my father might have been doing the same for me at the time on Sundays. Not checking for signs of trauma exactly. I don't think he much believed in that word applied to upper-class American children, but perhaps the reason he'd asked to see my drawings every week wasn't so much that he'd hoped I would become a great artist. He had to have abandoned that idea quickly, but that he'd wanted to make sure I was all right, that I was developing properly. For the first time since he died, I wished I could give him a call. Around 1 a.m., Ernest came in. He just had a bad dream and wanted cereal. The way I'd always dealt with nightmares was the way my father had taught me to deal with them. You had to draw what had happened in the dream and burn the result in the sink to prevent the nightmare from ever coming back. The technique worked exactly 100% of the time, and when Ernest came into the living room, he already had his box of crayons and a piece of paper in hand. I took him to the kitchen so he could eat his cereal while he drew. What did you dream about? I asked. Lane, he said. He never spoke of Lane. There had been counseling at school for the kids who'd seen him fall dead in the cafeteria, and the counselor had reassured us that Ernest's mental health was sound, that our son would let us know if and when he needed to talk about Lane. What was Lane doing in the dream? He was dead. I'm not sure it was a dream, though. Maybe I was just remembering when he died. Okay, I said. Do you want to draw it? Ernest nodded. He'd had what he was sure was a nightmare before dreaming/thinking about Lane, though, and he wanted to draw that first. He drew us all murdered by an octopus-like creature, the whole family torn to pieces, all of us but him. He simply witnessed the scene. He knew as he drew it that that monster in particular would never come haunt his dreams again, and so he applied himself. This was goodbye. We burned it. When the time came for Ernest to start drawing Lane, the scene of his death, I paid attention. I watched my son work. The book I'd just been reading had taught me that the order in which children drew episodes from their lives was significant, that a traumatized child would always start by drawing the most frightening aspect of a scene, and only then move on to decor, tweaking secondary elements, and polishing up details at length without ever going back to the first part. Ernest sure drew Lane first. Lane lying on the floor, eyes closed and mouth open, his tongue sticking out. Then went on to sketch the tiles he lay on, a group of kids gathered around the body, all connected to arrows that stated their names. Then he filled the background with a food counter, rectangles of mashed potatoes, fish nuggets, and peas. each nugget and pea drawn individually. I'm sure that all of this had been on the menu that day, the day Lane died. When scared, children were able to commit a great amount of detail to memory, the book had said. Even running for their lives, they were able to catch glimpses of military logic. They noticed how many planes were in the sky, in which direction they were flying. They remembered where bombs had fallen and what had been destroyed, who jumped in the river. Ernest went to pee, and I assumed he was finished with the drawing. Do you want to burn it in the sink, I asked when he returned. I'm not done, he said, and went back to work on Lane's body, to which he hadn't added a single detail since he first drawn it, to which he hadn't even added any color. He drew Len's right hand, which had been a strange hand, one with a thumb the size of a slider bun. I knew the thumb had made Lane the object of a lot of jokes. Macrodactyly, his problem was called. Lane himself had told me about it once. Though I knew the kids made fun of him for it, I wasn't sure whether Ernest ever had. Did Lane's hand frighten you? I asked Ernest. He shrugged. I didn't care really, he said. Matt made fun of him all the time, but I didn't care. Do you wish you'd defended him, though? I said, when Matt made fun of him. I thought maybe that was what was haunting my son, his first ever regret, not having stood up for Lane and his enormous finger. But Ernest shrugged again. I guess it was a little weird, he said. But when you're weird, people make fun of you. You have to accept it. After a while, during which he added and colored more peas, he asked me if there was anything I wanted to draw and burn in the sink myself. I said there wasn't, but he insisted. Don't you want to draw Grandpa? He asked. I waited too long to say anything. It would be nice if we forgot about him, he said. He wasn't looking at me, was still coloring peas. Why do you think that? I said. Did you not like Grandpa? It makes you sad to think about him. You've been sad since he died. I think we should all forget about him. It was a long time ago. I told him that it wasn't that easy, that you had to remember the people you loved, but he seemed imperious to the argument. He'd put a roof on top of the school cafeteria and was about to get to work on the sky above it. They say never to act shocked when your child tells you what's on his mind, to welcome any thought of his with an open heart, and I guess I'd internalized the advice well enough. I didn't tell Ernest how fucked up it was, suggesting that we all forget about my father, that we treat any memory we had of him the way we treated nightmares. I didn't tell him he worried me. Was it sunny that day? I asked him instead, the day Lane died. I thought of Nikki's sister then, for some reason, the twins in her stomach, the 4 hands, the 20 fingers growing in there. I thought of my friend Henry, too, who was going so far and at such speed right now, to Paris, another place my father had loved. He had to still be up in the air. He had to still be up there in the dark. Henry, I mean. Ernest said that it had been raining the day Lane died, and he grabbed a gray crayon. He handed me a black one so I could get started on my own drawing. He was staring at me. He wouldn't stop staring at me until I started drawing. Maybe I could draw a part of my father, I thought. One specific memory. Surely there was something about him that I could stand to forget. Ernest smiled when I took the crayon. Then, right when I put it to the paper to get to work on my outline, he asked how much had left by Sally's door for the tooth. In French, we say I have a cat in my throat. I don't know what that is. It's rusty, I'm sorry.
So we do have time for questions.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you. What inspired it?
I think it's a mix of things. I did read that book about children's drawing in war zones, and I think in some way I wanted to talk about that. I think my stories, they grow very slowly over time, and I have like pieces of stories. I don't know how to connect them necessarily, and then I read something that kind of makes sense and illuminates. So I think I had the father with the 2 kids, a little bit like restless and tired, and then, I don't know, and then I read that book, and I think a few things I had on different burners kind of coalesced around it. I'm a very slow writer, which kind of helps these things happen. If you're not in a rush, then, like anything you read can just, be the magical key.
I was also interested that you chose a father, and you made a comment at the beginning.
Yeah.
That it was you had chosen a father.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean,
just because it popped into your head, or
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously not an autobiographical story. I'm not a father of 2, and I'm neither my mother or any. But I think I'm kind of like I think they always say write what you know, and I think I don't know very much about fathers, and so I'm interested. I see so many depictions of fathers. I had a very absent father, and then like he died young, and I think I had a lot of questions about how did he see me? I don't think he saw me this way, but I'm like I think I'm curious about fathers in general. So that's the autobiographical part, even though the write what you know thing I think has its limits. I like to imagine what happens in other people's heads. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for that wonderful story. I laughed a lot. I was interested in how you were using dialogue labels. In the first half or so, you're using a lot of dialogue labels. He said, she said, and it's being used, I imagine, because it makes the scene a bit more artificial, right? To create so the comedy feels, you're signaling that the comedy is comedy. And then later on, the dialogue labels drop away. When you think about other writers who use dialogue labels in the same manner, how do you manage? Like, I always get very anxious when I'm using a technique other writers use because I don't want to sound like them. So how are you thinking through using the dialogue labels?
Well, dialogue labels, I think like you were right, like the repetition of he said, I said is inherently funny. But I also think it's something that I came to because I'm really resistant to qualifying the way people say certain things. Like she guffawed or she startled me, and so I said is to me has become a sort of invisible word. He said or she said, but then obviously it's there on the page. The reader has to stop to read them, and so there's a storm of them when the dialogue is funny, and they tend to drop when the conversation becomes a little bit more tense. But I should study more. I should study the way the writers I love deal with it. It's bad because there are students in the room right now, and I always say like if there's something you love, you should look at it closely and see how they deal with certain things. But I think I separate maybe too much what I read for pleasure and what I read for research or for school. And with the authors I really like, I never analyze them, and maybe I should start looking at how they do it. But he said, the dialogue tags to me, it's more, I never want a reader to be confused, and so it's just an easy, I've come to think of those as kind of invisible. Yes.
Can you talk about how you found the ending of your story?
This was a few years ago that I wrote this one, but I think I assumed it would go on for a couple more pages. It's hard, you're kind of wrapping things up, but you don't know exactly what the last beat is going to be. And I was like, I think Ernest is pretty worrisome in that moment. And I don't know, I said, what's the next weird thing he could say? And so I had him ask about the money that his sister would receive. And I was like, this feels like the end. So it kind of like, usually when I write stories, I kind of have to backtrack. I realized that the ending was 2 paragraphs ago. And this one, it kind of surprised me that it happened. It's like, oh, I know it ends here. But I don't remember what I had in mind for the end. It's like, this one was an easy one, quote unquote, like it kind of made sense.
It was just set up so nicely because it completed the whole arc of the tooth.
Yeah.
And the tooth fairy and leaving the glass outside, the door and everything. So.
Thank you.
That was so great, and I really loved the abrupt humor of the piece. I was curious because there's just so much art in the story and children's drawings, like how you were conceptualizing what those look like, and then finding language to describe them.
Well, that book helped. Reading that book about children's drawings in Warzone, how do you describe a drawing? And this, I think, in terms of what I take from real life as well, a lot of nieces and nephews who draw a lot, like their parents are artists, and I was really surprised by the quality of their drawing, and I think like maybe that like I have a niece who's like really, you know, draws extremely intricate things, and her brother was more like and so I was just and they gave me a lot of them because that's, you know, like they're very generous and that's all they have to give, and they see it makes us happy, and so I have all these drawings and I have so many at home, and I like to look at them, and yeah, I think it's and I'm glad that the cover in the end kind of echoed that. It doesn't look like, it looks a bit childish in some parts, but yeah, I mean I'm not really good at describing things, and I usually try to avoid it. But yeah, like with the simplicity of these drawings, like the stick figures and the cross sections, I feel like these were easier to picture for a reader than, you know, like a castle and with like rounded hedges or something. So I was like, a cross section, everyone can kind of imagine a dollhouse and kind of make it look the way they want. But yeah, I try to find ways around my terribleness of describing things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I also very much like the way the story ended, and I just wanted to say, as a father with 2 younger kids, that the tooth part is really interesting to me because kids are always losing teeth. It's a big deal to them. And one of the things I'm aware of, or become aware of, or been reminded of, or not, because I've become aware of through their experience, is like, I have no memory of my teeth. I mean, I know that my teeth did come out. I know that I assume it was important. I remember getting, like, you know, a quarter. But when that happened and what my feelings were is completely gone. So when you encounter it like with your kids, and there's this excitement, there's this, like, you know, I had one daughter just recently lost one, was hanging there like an angle for a week. And so it's an interesting thing. Like when, you know, it's a very significant event. Obviously in the story also this dead part, this thing that comes out that you're excited to get rid of. You know, you don't necessarily want it out, but so I found that really interesting. That it's a good detail for the experience of, at least for me, I don't know, maybe everyone else remembers when their teeth came out, but I have no memory at all.
Yeah. No, I remember a traumatic one because my sister like knocked it out. So I remember this one, but it's true, you're right. Like other than that, like it's a non-event.
But whereas in kids, it's like so important. They can both, my daughters can tell you exactly how many teeth are out and when they're coming next. It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, you see them play with it for days, and it's like disgusting. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's more like they're like she's excited about the money, but there's more than that. Yeah, there's something like
Because it's a dead thing that comes out, but it's a sign of moving forward.
Yeah. No, it's a good I was pretty happy to find it. Yes.
That was great. I just want to echo everybody saying how much I enjoyed it, and and the language was so great, the voices of the kids, and I was just curious if you have to, like when you write in English, which is a second or whatever language for you, then what do you have to think to yourself? Is this an American voice? Is this a French voice? Would I phrase it differently in this context? Or?
It's strange because I don't end up phrasing it differently, but there's another story in the collection where it's narrated by a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, something like that, but it's a French girl, and I don't think when I write the dialogue I think of it differently, but I was reluctant to read it because she still feels very French to me, so I don't know in what way, but no, I don't really, I mean, I guess if I write a French character, there will be a little bit more obnoxious, but not, I say this very with a lot of like warmth in my heart. But yeah, like there's French is just a heavier language. It just takes a lot more syllables to say the exact same thing, and so if I'm writing a French person in English, I have to account for that. It cannot just be that they have the same rhythm, and so I have to add not an adverb because I try to avoid them at all costs, but like some extra word that maybe doesn't need to be there if I write a French person. Yes.
I really liked all the characters. Especially the grandpa, who was maybe a little bit evil, but I thought really interesting, and like regardless, I ended up liking him. I don't know if that's a hot take, but did you have some inspiration for him in mind, or were you just like, I'm gonna create a character that's this, this, and this?
Yeah, I mean, I like them all. I think there's nothing wrong with liking evil characters. No, I think like to kind of echo the first answer. I think it's just like if I'm interested, if I'm going to write about fathers, I'm also writing about this man's father, and so he's thinking about his own education a lot. And yeah, I think it's the notion of like what's a traumatized child, and like his own dad, like the grandpa, would have never used this word, and so like we see him as a harsher person, but maybe it corresponds to like his time or the way he was told to raise his kids. Yeah, I don't judge him at all. I think, and I like that the son goes back and forth between like he never tells his children he was a horrible person. But yeah, it's always fun to. I don't know if he's evil. He says pretty horrible things, but it's also a fun part of writing to have like these characters that are not morally perfect. Yeah, so I always try to have one of those in each story.
Thanks for that. I also really enjoyed that. I love also that you got a whole story. I mean, it's really fun for us. And I loved your novel, the material.
Thank you so much.
I just had a question about how do you choose which is the title story of a volume? What goes into that?
You know, I did this not too long ago, so I should remember. I think I'm really bad at titles in general, and so I was thinking. I think my husband ended up saying "Once and Only" sounded good, because sometimes I also don't trust like. My stories are pretty sad, most of them, and they often have sad titles, and I don't want to, or I think one of my favorite stories in the collection is called "The Presentation on Egypt," and so it's not a sad title, but it doesn't evoke that much, I think. So I kind of wanted it to be the title because I have a special fondness for that story, but I'm like, yeah, it's not really, doesn't jump at you, does it? Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, I think in the end I deferred to my husband, who has a better sense of what sounds good. As far as titles go, like, and in fact, like he often like finds the titles because again I'm terrible at it. So, but I don't know. I don't know if it's easy. One sound only is not super easy to say. I don't know. Yes.
So I'm sensing some self-deprecation here. The things we care about, and the things how things kind of come together in pieces. And we obviously all really enjoyed the story. I'm wondering in the classroom though, like, writing to you seems like this process that sort of comes together through, various, I don't know, like happy accidents or something. Yeah, plus planning.
Plus work.
So, right, yeah. So I'm just wondering, like in the classroom, how that works for you. Like, what are the sort of, like, how do you tell students about, where inspiration comes from, or how do you put together a story, that type of stuff?
Oh well, yeah. This question came up a couple times this semester. How to get started on something, and I think the way every single one of my stories and novels have started is the way they start in the final draft. Like I start with a sentence, and then I don't know, it's usually people talking, and then as it goes on, I'm like, who are these people? Why are they talking about this? And so it's really a process of discovery, but there's this initial thing that interested me that is not necessarily picked up from real life, but just like maybe I'm walking and I'm gonna, I don't know, like a random sentence comes up and I was like, oh, this sounds like an intriguing start to something, and I don't know what it is. But that's a little bit hard to convey to very young writers. It sounds a little bit new agey. I think so, but I tell them if they're uninspired, because most of them know exactly what they want to write about. Like just to take something small that bothered them. I think is like the way Lydia Davis put it in a recent essay. Like you write about something because there's something about it that bothers you, and not necessarily in a huge political way, but like this interaction that happened in front of you at the cafe, and it made you uncomfortable, or you have a little pebble in your shoe about it, and so like you're just gonna discover what it is about it that made you uneasy or something. So that's a starting point. I mean, there's a lot of things. You can just take a character that exists and put him in different circumstances, you know, like it depends on what the student wants to do. They just want to exercise the muscle of writing without like finding necessarily what it is they want to write about, and they just want to write, in the style of, there's a lot of things that can be done.
Just as a follow-up, you had mentioned from my first question that you wrote about the father because there was something you wanted to understand or discover.
Yeah, for instance.
What did you discover?
I don't think it's not that I want to discover something; it's I want to think about something. Because obviously, I discovered who this person was, but this person is, maybe I'll write another thing in his point of view, but like for all intents and purposes, like this person is now trapped in this book and will never come back to me. But no, I like to imagine what a father or mother, or grandmother or sister like would think about certain situations. And so it's not so much discovery or learning, it's imagining. I think it's the best way to put it. It's the fun. It's what writing is fun.
Shall we give you a break?
Oh.
Yeah.